Ready to unlock your full potential? Join me, Gregg Berman, your guide to self-discovery, self-acceptance, and joy. This podcast blends life coaching, mindfulness, and the power of nature to help you manage anxiety, cultivate self-compassion, and embrace your true self. You'll find solace, guidance, and inspiration as we develop actionable strategies to break free from self-doubt and limiting beliefs to step into the fullness of who you are meant to be. Along our journey, we'll embrace the imperfection, fallibility, and messiness of what it means to be a human, with love, care, and acceptance for all of who you are. This is your sanctuary for a more mindful, authentic, and fulfilling life. Let's embark on this journey together as we give you permission to be your full self. Welcome to this first episode of the Permission to Be Your Full Self podcast. I hope you find a nourishing experience here that creates space to accept all of you. And I want to say at the outset, this podcast, especially this first episode, may be messy or scattered. It's certainly going to be an adventure. And if you have trouble following, you have my sympathies. Welcome to my brain. And I understand if for any reason listening is not for you. Of course, you may find it makes perfect sense to you and that you find a resonance and even a home in the thoughts that I share. Whatever way it is for you, and however I show up, that's okay. Because as humans, we are messy, we are imperfect, and it's that feeling that we need to be perfect, that feeling that we're not enough just as we are, that creates the pain and fear that holds us back. While the volume may be lower than it used to be, I still have the voices in my head that say to me, "You can't say this thing or that thing, Greg. Nobody wants to hear that." I still have pangs of fear that come up thinking about what I'm sharing, how my voice sounds, whether anyone will listen, and whether I'll have the energy to continue to do this week after week. The fears that I might be committing to something bigger than I can handle, or that it won't resonate with anyone at all. After all, I'm human, and we all have those inner voices that sometimes make themselves known loud and clear, and sometimes they're whispering beneath our conscious ability to hear them, and yet can have a negative impact if we allow them to. I hear those voices within me and feel those feelings, and so much more that comes up. I can honor those parts within me, I can listen to them lovingly and with compassion, and I can offer them comfort without having to live from those insecurities or self-judgments. As a mentor of mine, Peter Sage says, "The point of a goal is not about achieving the goal, but in seeing who we get to become on the path towards that goal." I know I'm already a winner because I've become someone different simply on the path to this first episode. And so, while I would love to give you a nice, sparkling, well-manicured show that is an absolute joy to your ears, I can't promise you that. What I can promise is to be as real and authentic as I'm able. And if my imperfection and my learning curve feels like a struggle that does not serve you, I completely understand. But if you are able to stick with it and grow with me, I hope you'll find what I have to share valuable. I hope it gives you a resource and a sense of permission for places in your life where you struggle. And perhaps struggle is not a word that resonates for you. Yet still there is a gnawing sense of something missing in your world, something you are not accessing within yourself. I will speak to all of that and so much more. As time goes on, and as I learn the tech and ins and outs of podcasting, I'm quite sure that this will get better and better. It will always be real, and I hope to always maintain some rawness, authenticity, and vulnerability as I become more polished. But this first episode might be a little bit more real in the messiness. I'm excited to be starting this journey with you. So away we go with the show. This first episode explores the messiness of being a human through a story. I'd love to hear what you take from it and what it brings up for you. And please know, I'm always eager to hear your feedback or thoughts on what would most serve you, things you'd like me to speak about, and ways to make the experience better for you. I hope you enjoy. As I recorded the notes for my first podcast several weeks ago, the sun had just set. I was sitting outside my home next to the ocean, cooling down after just finishing a run. As I was running, thoughts were streaming in, fast and furious. That's always the case on my runs. I knew I would not be able to remember or even record everything I was thinking because there are just too many thoughts at once, trying to push their way out as if from a fire hose. But I wanted to capture as much as I could. My thoughts on this run included celebrating myself for the things that I had been accomplishing lately, and also for simply taking the time to notice my progression. Having an ADHD brain that was not diagnosed till my mid-40s, by which time I developed a lot of unproductive patterns, means focusing enough to stay on task takes a lot of effort for me. And I'm often not as successful as I wish I was. In fact, a few years ago, while feeling frustration at my lack of forward movement, the whole year, a repeating thought was, if I could just have one wish, I would want to have impeccable executive functioning and follow through. Because I reasoned, with that, everything else becomes possible. And while ADHD definitely makes it harder to focus, or means I have to exert more effort to achieve the same level of focus as someone with a neurotypical brain, what really lies at the heart of the problem is the not enough stories, the fears, the victimhood, the insecurities, and the unresolved traumas. The ADHD simply exacerbates and feeds on all of that. I've done a lot of inner and outer work for decades now, and as I grow and evolve, I find there are periods that call for more intense work, so I can step up to my next level. There have been a few of those periods in the last few years, including after what I call my near panic attack last year. I'll share more about that another time. But for now, on my run, what I wanted to celebrate was, even though I commonly have days where I'm not getting as much done as I would like, what I'm not having, which used to be such a common occurrence for me, are the days I get absolutely nothing done. The days where I think in the next moment I'm going to start, or the next moment, or the next, or the next. And not only does that start never come, but I also don't do anything else, whether functional or fun, because I'm expecting the next moment to be magically different. Thinking in the next moment I will actually start on the thing I wanted to do. So I shouldn't do anything else, because that might get in the way. So I sit in the stasis, frozen and waiting to begin. Those days were always so frustrating, so heartbreaking, and so demoralizing. And gosh, I used to have a lot of them. In fact, at one time they predominated. I'm so much more efficient now. And yes, I would like that efficiency to be greater, and I would like to struggle less than I sometimes do. And the reality is, I know that it's happening more each day. In fact, these days, with my own therapist, I sometimes have difficulty in describing what's happening for me in any given period, because how I was when I behaved in a certain way, even in the recent past, may not be an accurate reflection of who I am in this moment right now. Who I was yesterday is not who I am today. Who I was last week is certainly not who I am today. I'm constantly growing, evolving, and changing. And I choose to take note of that. And I choose to celebrate my evolution. Because as you may know already, and certainly if you've read any of my blog, there is so much power, freedom, and joy in celebrating ourselves. Doing so has the power to boost our motivation, our resilience, and our confidence, even though celebrating ourselves can feel foreign to many of us. Something else that I want to celebrate right now is that I'm sharing this podcast with you, because this is my first ever podcast. Oh, I've been invited onto a number of other people's podcasts, which I've really enjoyed. And for the past year, I've thought of creating my own. When I first started seriously considering creating my own, well, actually, let me back up for a moment. Before any intentionality, when merely the idea of creating a podcast first entered my brain several years ago, there was the immediate thought of, no, I can't do that. No, I don't want to do that. No, that's not for me. That just seems way too hard. But slowly, over time, as I evolved, I started having a different thought. What if I did it in a way that works for me, rather than the models I've seen out there? My initial thought was, I wonder if I could make a podcast that's just a recording of the blog that I write every week. I had never heard of such a thing, but I thought, why not? And so looked it up and saw, oh my God, that is a thing. That is possible. I can do that. Not that I needed to limit myself to what somebody else has done, but at the same time, there was a comfort and a safety in knowing that it was a thing, and I started to get excited. But in any given moment, I may have 50 ideas of the next steps to take. And often, many of those steps have many smaller steps to make them happen. And when they all try to come out at once, which they usually do, it creates a big log jam that can keep me stuck. One small example of this is something that used to occur to me every time I tried to read a book. Looking at all of the unread books on my shelf, I would pick one, but that would remind me of another one I wanted to read, or even that I should read. That would then make me think of other books and maybe even other projects that I should do. So in a matter of seconds, I would have all of these ideas of which book to read first with no clear winner, and a feeling of, if I made a choice, I might be wasting my time by making the wrong choice. It would feel overwhelming, and I'd just avoid the whole thing for fear of making that wrong choice. Of course, any choice would be better than making no choice at all, but it took me a long while to come to that awareness, and in the meantime, I did not know any other way of being. The thing is, those same thought patterns apply to every other aspect of my day as well. It was not just about reading a book. So anyway, at some point, I did decide I was going to create a podcast. But before I even had the chance to do that, the original concept started changing and growing. I still plan to do recordings in my weekly blogs, but I'll also share thoughts like what I'm sharing now. I may have guests, and well, the reality is, I don't have any idea what it will become. What I do know is that like everything in my life, it's an iterative process, and I don't have to know before I start. Like a snowball going downhill that starts from just a few flakes and grows, it will change and morph. And all along the journey, I will get to show up in new ways. I'll get to share deeper insights. And even if I ultimately make the choice to pivot to something else, the process of moving forward will bring untold gifts. Even though I already knew all that, what can be difficult for me is getting rolling to begin with. Given that snowball in its initial push down the hill, so to speak, oops, I messed that sentence up. And since I don't yet know how to edit, let me be happily imperfect and leave that flaw in rather than recording the whole thing over. So, as I was saying, even though I knew all that, what can be difficult for me is getting rolling to begin with. Giving that snowball its initial push down the hill, so to speak. Especially when it always feels like there's an uphill section filled with downed tree limbs and other debris to get over before I can start rolling down the hill. I was not moving forward because some other shiny object or project might catch my attention, or because of the tech overwhelm, or because of having no clue where to begin or how to wade through the mounds of information out there. Information that, to me, all read like stereo instructions, written in a language unfamiliar to me. And honestly, because there are still parts of my brain that show up with resistance when I think something is going to be hard. We all have resistances, and I know many people struggle with similar issues on getting started. And in fact, that's the vision behind this first episode, to say that you don't have to be perfect or have it all figured out. You don't have to do it like somebody else, and you don't have to do it the right way. Whether that's about creating a podcast, doing a piece of art, doing some writing, or a project at work, growing a friendship, or starting any new skill. Whatever it is that you are wanting to do, you can give yourself the permission to start. Give yourself the permission to be crappy or imperfect. That's certainly what I'm doing here. I remember when I gave my first talk several years ago. It was on using EFT tapping to get over or manage anxiety and overwhelm. And I was really anxious at the thought of doing it. What am I going to say? And how will I manage the tech involved? Even though it's not a hell of a lot of tech, it was something new, something I didn't know how to do. And I had thoughts of, what if no one likes the talk? Or worse, what if the talk goes poorly? And that is proof that others will use, or even that I will use, to say I'm not valuable, to say that I'm not lovable and I'm not worthy. What if everyone abandons me when they realize how incompetent I really am? What if my thoughts from childhood and into early adulthood are really true? That I'm actually not worthy of love and care because I'm less than everyone else? Because I'm not even human. Some of those thoughts were loud and clear, and some of them were subconscious whispers. Either way, they were having the most unhelpful impact on my ability to move forward. So I decided if I want to move forward on a project I had desired for so long, I was going to have to give myself permission to fuck it up. And those were the very specific words that were in my head. I'm giving myself permission to fuck it up. And they were really powerful. Those words were the difference between doing the talk and not doing it. And it wasn't just a platitude. I truly meant it. Certainly I did not want to fuck it up, but I knew if I was just saying those words, I give myself permission to fuck it up, and not honoring the real possibility that that might happen. If I was internally thinking deep down, I can fuck this up, but it better actually be really good, because if it's not, I'm never doing this again. Well, that is not true permission, and I would be doing myself a disservice, because the fear would still be ruling me. I didn't have to get rid of the fear, but I also did not have to operate or not operate from the place of fear. I could let the fear come along for the ride. So I was literally giving myself permission to fuck it up. That meant knowing if what happens is the talk goes really horribly wrong, or merely does not meet my ideal desires, certainly I won't be thrilled about that. Certainly I might feel some shame or some sadness or negativity, but I was also making it okay to feel those feelings. And it was a decision to not make having any discomfort mean something about me as a person. Even more, it meant knowing and cultivating the belief that because I started, I was going to learn something, even if the first try was absolutely horrible. I was going to learn something that would give me information for the next try, or insight into how I might pivot in the future. As it turned out, it went pretty well, and I even got some new clients that would not have happened otherwise had I not given myself permission at all. So often in my life, I have not moved forward because I have not given myself permission to fuck it up. I have not given myself permission to do it wrong. I have not given myself permission to not know how. And I have not given myself permission to be embarrassed when things don't go the way that I wanted. There was a part of me that always used to feel like I was waiting for life to start, rather than being aware that I was, in fact, living life, just not from the place that I wanted to be. It can be gut-wrenching to realize that I delayed attempts sometimes for years, or I never even tried at all because of my insecurities. Have you ever felt that way? Is there something in your life that you are feeling that way about right now? Of course, the path is not always easy, but we all can do hard things. There was certainly a time in my life that I did not believe that, and it can still be something I need to remind myself of when something seems really foreign or complex or emotionally taxing. What is also true is that ultimately, not everything I attempt is going to be something that I'm good at, or something that I want to do, or something that serves me. Or it may not be the right thing for me. And when I say the right thing, I mean right for me because it does or does not align with me and my values, rather than not right because somebody else says it's not right. But the thing is, we may not know what is right and what we want to do until we try something. Until we put ourselves out there and until we experiment and give ourselves the opportunity to learn, to grow, to succeed, and yes, even to fail, perhaps especially to fail. Permission to fail and be messy is a key ingredient to success. We create the path to fulfillment by acknowledging and caring for the I don't know how stories, the not enough stories, the fear, the anxiety, the self-doubt, and the overwhelm. And when we can do that in community and with support of someone to remind us of our value when we forget, it becomes so much easier. That's in fact why I do what I do, because there was a time that I felt so alone and so unsure, and there was a way that I mentally and emotionally beat myself up. From the earliest time on starting my healing journey, as I started to see a change, my thought was, I want to support others to not have to suffer in the way that I felt I was suffering. And of course, I wanted to continue to suffer less myself. As I support my clients, I'm not only supporting them, I'm being supported by them, and I'm learning and growing and I'm becoming stronger in my efforts to be better for them. And of course, I'm still human. I still need to work through my own inner obstacles at times. There were many, both inner and outer obstacles on the way to this podcast. I thought I was going to record it a couple of months ago, and it felt overwhelming to figure out even the process to record it. I'd heard that others had recorded a podcast while driving in their car. Sounds easy, but what did they record it on? What app did they use? Where did they upload it? And on and on. Searching for answers became more overwhelming because there is such a wealth of information out there on the, quote, right way to do it. Some say to do it this way, others say to do it that way, and whether intentionally or not, that information often comes attached to scare tactics that implore, and if you don't do it this way, you'll never be successful. So many variables that, quote, must be gotten just right, like the music and the marketing and the sound tech and on and on. While I can see how that's valuable for some people, especially if they have a team to have all the systems in place first, that's really not the best method for me, and just adds to a sense of overwhelm. With my ADHD brain and my own insecurities and my traumas, that becomes too much trying to figure out every little piece. Or perhaps I should say, trying to figure it all out before starting. That really is the key, to not feel like I have to get it right before starting. It's going to be an iterative process. I was at a shadow retreat a couple of months ago which I look forward to sharing more about in a future episode. What came up for me while there was the idea that I was not allowing myself to fully accept praise for my gifts, or to show up to be fully visible because of what I was calling my arrogant asshole shadow. I never want to come from a place of feeling like I'm better than anyone else. Certainly, I've developed and cultivated certain sets of skills and knowledge that allow me to support others. Skills that give me a certain awareness and insight to help those that come to me. But I did not want that to come from in any way giving the impression that I thought others were less than me. After all, I felt less than so much of my life, and it was a horrible feeling. So I would never want to instill that in anyone else. And in fact, the mentors on my own journey that I have most resonated with and that I have allowed into the inner circle of people who get to mentor me are the people who admit their fallibility, those who talk openly about their imperfections. What I realized on the shadow retreat was that I don't have to disown my gifts, that me fully receiving praise and me fully celebrating and sharing my gifts is a way of giving others permission to do that same thing as well. One of the things that I committed to that week was that when I got home, I was going to spend a couple hours that weekend on creating my podcast. I thought that was all it would take. After all, I'm just making a recording, right? I'm happy to say I did follow through on my commitment of a few hours. If I hadn't followed through, I'm sure there would have been some regret, but I would have chosen to be compassionate with myself. However, rather than those few hours getting me to completion, or even near completion of my podcast, what happened was, as I got more information, I learned from different sources on the right way of creating a podcast. Certainly I did get some useful things accomplished that I felt proud of. But I also went back into that old overwhelm and thinking about that right way. And if you don't get it right with your first podcast set up this way or that, you're just never going to make it. In fact, a mentor of mine was coming out with her first podcast at that time. And even though she would have no way of knowing this, something she shared publicly, and not even to me specifically, contributed to my delay. Not that I'm in any way blaming her for that. It's my responsibility for how I chose to take on her words. And her words had nothing to do with me. Her words were about her podcast and the way things work for her. And what she had heard was, you want to have 5 podcasts in the queue before you go live to maximize the visibility algorithm. Well, when I heard that, I thought, oh shit, I didn't know that. Shit, I was just planning to create one, and then the next, and the next. Oh my god, how am I going to do this? If I haven't yet figured out all the tech behind creating one, how can I create 5? While there was a part of me that knew I didn't have to do it that way, there was another part that thought, I want this podcast to have the best shot at making it. And for a little while, I allowed that to slow me down again, till I created a mental shift. A mental shift that says, even if this podcast never becomes successful by the industry's measure of success, it will have already been a success for me. Because just in the effort to put it out there, I was invited to overcome my own limiting beliefs. I was invited to learn new skills. I was invited to cultivate a new level of resilience and self-trust as I moved through the learning curve and logistical blocks. Whatever happens after that is gravy. I'm certainly hoping that I attract an audience and that it becomes something that people find of great value, and that I really get to enjoy it as I get to share my wisdom. But either way, just recording this right now is a win, because it's me stepping out. It's me giving myself permission to show up. It's me giving myself permission to play and experiment and to try. And I think it will be successful, because I remember when I first started writing my blog, I used to think, oh my god, how am I ever going to come up with enough topics? How am I ever going to write about each piece of every topic? And now the reality is I have so many topics in the queue, more than I could possibly ever do. And I think about new ones all the time, and it's exciting. And I know that I don't have to cover every single nuance of every topic that I write. In fact, that's not even possible. It's true sometimes that it can feel like a drag or another chore to write it each week when I've got so many things that I'm trying to do. The reality, though, is each time I write a blog, I get a greater awareness of my own thoughts. I get greater insight into the way that I learn something new. And it is a practice of me formulating my own beliefs, my own ideals, my own vision for myself, this business, and the ways that I support the people that I work with, or those that are in any way touched by my work, whether that's directly or indirectly. So back to the idea of having a clearer vision and the perfect intro and outro and 5 podcasts in the queue or any of the other shoulds that you should have. I thought, you know what? Screw that. That might be valuable for someone else, and it might even support them. For me, that's getting in my way. And after all, my signature coaching program is Permission to Be Your Full Self. Well, my full self is not somebody who has everything set up perfectly before they start. So why am I trying to do things someone else's way? Following the quote rules to the letter might work well for some, though I think the reality is, for most of us, it can be valuable to notice what works for us. Sure, there are certain things that it can be helpful to get just right, but with the creative process, I find it's helpful to give myself permission to be messy and imperfect. What would it be like to give yourself that permission? I need to be messy to learn, so even what I'm sharing with you now, while I'm reading these words, I didn't sit down and write them. I just simply recorded them with no forethought, simply coming back from a run, and let them be messy. Yes, I've made some drafts of it since then, and you know what? I feel excited, I feel enthused, and already have visions for what else this podcast could be. And I don't know what that is. And I don't need to know. But I do want to give myself permission to start. Permission to do it my way, rather than the way you're supposed to do it. Rather than the way somebody else says that it works. One of the business marketing people that I follow on Instagram, I believe it's Susie Moore, has a tagline of "Let it be easy." One of the things she says in terms of creating, for example, Instagram posts, is that there's this vision of how you should do it. You should put out this many a day, or that many a day, or a week. And for her, what she found is what works for her is to post when she feels called to. She may put out one right after another multiple times in a single day. Sometimes she'll post every day, and sometimes there might be a day or two that goes by without any posts. She posts when it works for her. And while that might not be the way to do it for everybody, it's the way that works for her. And she has a very successful business by all conventional standards. I know for myself, I really don't always know what is the way that works best for me at the outset. But if I start with a thought of what is the quote right way, then honestly, I'll never begin. So I simply have to start. And that's my invitation for you too, to simply start. Maybe the way to start for you is not the same as it is for me, or for anyone else for that matter. But find what works for you so you have permission to begin, so that you have permission to be your full self, and even to know what that means. If any part of this episode resonates with you, I'd love to hear what you're taking away from it. And it would mean the world to me if you would put a like and a comment wherever you get your podcast. And of course, subscribe and share far and wide with anyone you think this might speak to. That will really help me grow. And the more I grow, the more I can be resourced to be there for you. And I want to be there for you. And I'm excited to see where this journey takes us. And remember, you can find your own way and have permission to be your full self. If you need support around that, I'm here to help you. I've developed a host of resources to support you, which you can find out more about either by signing up for my blog or viewing the coaching and EFT pages, all found on my website, inconnectionwithnature.com. That's all for this week. I'll see you in the next episode. May you have an empowering week.